Have you ever wondered why this house was named after Nelson Mandela? What if I told you some of it traces its steps to a boycott kicked off by black political organising here in Britain? For this specific block of flats in Casnoff Road, Stoke Newington, the story appears to be that it was actually originally named Morley House. And it wasn't just this place, but many up and down the country from as early as the 1960s that were being named as such, until apartheid ended in 1994. So how did councils back then even end up participating in boycotts against the apartheid government in the first place? In 1958, the progenitor of what would become Britain's most powerful anti-apartheid movement was founded, the Committee of African Organisations, or the CAO. The CAO was a student and worker union and was pan-Africanist, anti-imperialist and anti-colonial, fighting the struggle for unity and independence. It came about when multiple African and West Indian organisations in Britain merged, among them predominantly students' unions like the West African Students' Union, the Uganda National Congress, the African League, the Nigerian Union of Great Britain and Ireland, the Sierra Leone Students' Union, the South African Freedom Association, and many others. Communist leader Claudia Jones was also a member of the CAO. The CAO was a, quote, all-African forum for the discussion of matters affecting Africa, as well as to fight for independent African states, to spread among Africans the spirit of Pan-Africanism, and to assist the struggle of our people's freedom for liberty, equality, and national independence. Its objectives were, quote, to cooperate with any organisation on issues affecting continental Africa, to keep the conscience of the world alive to the problems affecting Africa, to provide facilities and a network of support for African leaders who visited the UK to press the British government for independence. The CAO lobbied the British government, writing them and the media multiple letters in protest of the injustices facing Africans across the empire as well as here in its metropole. In 1959, the CAO's representatives were part of a larger delegation who met with the Home Secretary to demand a public inquiry into the racism in this country. That same month, for example, was the month 32-year-old Kelso Cochrane, an Antiguan carpenter, was murdered by white supremacists in Notting Hill, West London. The CAO's boycott subcommittee, chaired by Femi Okunu, became active at this time, and by 1960, only a year later, it had successfully influenced the likes of the TUC and the National Union of Students at Oxford, Cambridge and the LSE, to name but a few of its members, to support or adopt a boycott of South African goods. From that point on, the Labour Party also pledged its support, and after this, from the mid-60s onwards, many councils also began boycotting. 1960 was also the year of the Sharpeville massacre, in which hundreds of people were murdered and many more injured by the police, who had opened fire on a group of unarmed protesters taking a stand against black Africans being required to carry passbooks in public at all times. In response, the CAO were part of a coalition that organised thousands of people to protest in London, and the organisation evolved quickly from that point forward. From March of 1960, the subcommittee had settled on its new name, the Anti-Apartheid Movement, or the AAM, and its membership grew, with the majority of members now being South African, many of whom were in exile in Britain. At this point, black activists and members of the wider black intelligentsia remained in active solidarity to this organisation, and throughout the 60s and 70s, the black population in general took part in sports boycotts, notably cricket and rugby, while students once again gradually became more prominent in the movement as the generation of British-born black Caribbean children entered higher education. In 1976, following the Soweto massacre, in which hundreds of black school children were gunned down by police as they protested the introduction of Afrikaans in schools, the West Indian Standing Conference, or the WISC, organised a mass demonstration in Notting Hill. 2 months after the Soweto massacre, Notting Hill Carnival that year saw the worst brutality from the police at that point, unleashed mostly on young carnival goers. Amid this, the WISC, seeing the parallels between South Africa and Britain, started to encourage members to boycott products and picket retailers. By the 80s, at a time when then Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher was referring to the ANC as a typical terrorist organisation, and when members of her party repeatedly called for Mandela to be hung or shot, even reportedly selling t-shirts at their party conferences, more and more councils started boycotting South African products. In 1981, Sheffield became the first to sever all ties with the apartheid movement, including withdrawing pension fund investments and barring them from using their playing fields. Many others, including most inner London boroughs, like Hackney, followed, and by 1985, 120 councils were part of some form of anti-apartheid initiative. Present-day London Borough of Hackney Could never. So it was at this time that we start seeing an increase in places being named after Mandela. And interestingly enough, the creators of Only Fools and Horses initially named the house Nelson Mandela House to take the piss out of the loony left boroughs, naming landmarks and addresses after someone who at this point was considered a persona non grata, a council like Southwark, where the show is set. The producers also named the fictional estate after the Tanzanian anti-colonial activist Julius Nyerere, who led Tanzania into independence from Britain. And so this was a very specific set of choices that they were making. While Thatcher may have supported South Africa, in 1984, over 50,000 people took part in a protest, many among them black, which was organised by the AAM against the then South African president P.W. Botha's state visit to see Thatcher. By the mid-1980s, 25% of ordinary, regular Brits of all races were boycotting South African goods. And this was the greed is good era, so this wasn't a particularly less materialistic or more ethical time. It was boycotts and action like this around the world that eventually evolved into mass disinvestment from South African banks, companies, and university endowments, which eventually led to the collapse of the apartheid economy and the end of the regime in 1994. Boycotts, while among some of the most passive of action one can take, are also among the most powerful in that the hit is financial and can be mortally wounding when enough people take part. So, if you didn't know that what grew to become the most powerful anti-apartheid boycott movement in Britain was pioneered by a black group comprised mainly of African student unions in the 50s, well, now you do. We've never been too small a community to make our mark, not then and not now. And if you want to know more about what I spoke about today, most of it came from The Politics of Race in Britain and South Africa by Elizabeth Williams. I also got a lot of stuff from the AAM Archives website and The Guardian, as I have tagged throughout this video. You can't imagine such a stand being taken in local politics today, and especially not by the London Borough of Hackney, who refused to divest their pension funds from Israeli hedge funds, and Meg Hillier, who is the MP not for the part of Hackney that Nelson Mandela House is in, which is Hackney North and Stoke Newington. She is my MP in Hackney South and Shoreditch, and the boundary actually only starts a few short streets away from Casnorth Road and Nelson Mandela House. Anyway, she refused to vote. She abstained vote that was seeking to make BDS illegal for public bodies, and she also abstained from a vote for a ceasefire in Gaza. She also has not said not one peep in defense of her Hackney colleague Diane Abbott, who is her senior and her forebear. And half the things that she'd be able to do in politics, she wouldn't be able to do without the likes of Diane Abbott, who, as of today, they are moving to replace her after nearly 38 years of being the MP in Hackney North and Stoke Newington, i.e. where Nelson Mandela House sits. How far we have fallen.